Okay, I think we're going to make a start. We may still have some people joining us, but we're going to start anyway so we keep to time. Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to session 2 of our Sustainable Procurement Programme, which EDAS is delighted to be hosting as part of its Community of Practice series, supported by the Scottish Government. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Liz McEntee, and I'm the chair of EDAS, and I'm really delighted to be hosting today's event. Now, this is the second of a two-part workshop which is designed to share knowledge, ideas, and case studies on sustainable procurement with those working in the economic development community. I suppose I should say, I hope that everyone has had time to recover from lack of sleep. By now, if like me, you stayed up late to watch events across the pond the other night. But it's great to see we have many attending today who were also able to take part last week. Don't worry if you missed that. This EDAS event can stand alone, and last week's event is available to view on the EDAS website. Now, I'll repeat what I said last week, that I realise the opportunity to mingle is lessened when we're on Zoom, but I do hope you'll still be able to make connections during the roundtable sessions that will take place after our speaker input. And hopefully you'll be glad to hear that we've allowed additional time for this, for those of you who were here last week, because we were a little bit pressed for time on that part of the programme last week. Now, here at EDAS, we're working on a number of strategic priorities, one of which is to support the creation of an inclusive economy which values and brings well-being to people, places, and the planet. Sustainable procurement offers a powerful tool to achieve this. So this series of workshops and the learning and awareness they bring to our members is important, particularly in the challenging economic times we're now experiencing and the times that lie ahead. We aim through all of our events to balance knowledge, sharing with ideas for good practice, enabling our audience to reflect on expert input and to share experiences among themselves, offering all of you who work in the economic development community information, development, contacts and tools to inform your everyday practice. And this event is no exception. Now, we've once again secured excellent speaker input for this session with contributions from Sustainable Procurement Limited, the Scottish Government, Glasgow City Region Deal, and the NHS National Services Scotland. We'll listen to these presentations in turn before moving into roundtable workshops, and you will all have been assigned a group to join, details of which will appear on your screen when we get to this part of the morning. Now, because of the practicalities of managing a large Zoom meeting, can I encourage you to add any questions and comments you have to the chat box so that they can be shared with speakers throughout this event. And time permitting, we may be able to take some of those questions directly at the end of the session, following feedback from the workshops. And again, to aid sound quality, we're keeping our audience muted during the speaker input. But as I say, please add any comments or any queries you have to the chat box, which everyone will be able to view. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce Barbara Morton, who is Director with Sustainable Procurement Limited. She's based in Perthshire and works with governments, public bodies and companies internationally, and is currently involved in projects in Australia, Paraguay and Brazil, at a distance presumably. Barbara has a background in public procurement and spent 9 years working for the NHS. After working at Manchester Business School, she became technical advisor to the UN Environment Programme International Task Force on Sustainable Public Procurement. Over the last 10 years, Barbara has worked with the Scottish Government supporting the Procurement Reform Act process, as well as developing and delivering training and guidance on sustainable procurement. And more recently, she's been supporting the Scottish Government's Procurement and Climate Forum. Barbara is going to set the scene for us this morning. And I have to say, Barbara, it's a real privilege to have such a distinguished and expert guest to open our event and to have you here to share your insights with our EDAS audience. So over to you, Barbara.
Well, thanks very much for the introduction, Liz, and it's my great pleasure to have been invited here. My pleasure to be introducing improving practice. Thanks very much for asking me to join you here today to talk about improving practice. I'll be talking about a few examples and case studies and perhaps the stories behind some of those case studies. And I think my theme for today really will be identifying opportunities so that we can continue to benefit from improving practice, as you say, Liz, in these very challenging times. I think Alison's driving, so could we have the next slide, please? So I thought I'd start with the sustainable procurement duty. I know a number of you will be very familiar with this, and you'll have seen this slide last time from, I think Joe showed this slide. But it's really, for me, the framework within which all of these activities around sustainable procurement are being delivered. So it's really the theme for today. And again, it's not just a duty as far as I'm concerned, it's also a way of identifying opportunities to look for ways of improving practice, improving economic, social, environmental well-being and reducing inequality, looking for opportunities to involve small and medium-sized enterprises and third sector bodies, and of course supported businesses. And one that I think increasingly we're going to be turning our attention to, ways of promoting innovation through the procurement process, and of course acting in ways to secure these good outcomes for local communities. So the next slide, please, looks at how do we actually capture and maximize those opportunities. So taking it from the top, if you look in the middle of this slide, it's the slide that we use that summarizes a lot of the activity that goes on around sustainable procurement in Scotland. And taking it from the top, of course, what we're aiming to do here is deliver on Scotland's national purpose and the national outcomes. And indeed, if you go back further to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but on a day-to-day basis, that needs to be translated into organisational intended outcomes, as we call them. So the things that are expressed, articulated through organisations' strategies and policies, and then further translated into procurement outcomes and objectives. So the procurement strategy reflects organisational intended outcomes in procurement. And down further into the day-to-day procurement, how we translate that and embed it into procurement activity at a framework or a contract level. And that leads to, we hope, the two most important words on that slide, the outcomes that we're delivering. So the outcomes for people, for communities, the outcomes, whether or not we're delivering those outcomes, is the real test of whether or not we're getting sustainable procurement right, as far as I'm concerned. And around the outside of that flowchart, you can see the ways that we get there, the sorts of things that we use to help us get there. At the top left, the sustainable procurement duty tools, which are now available online, and there's guidance behind those tools. So we're promoting the use of those tools throughout the public sector in Scotland. The tools help with the development of procurement strategy, whether that be the organisational level procurement strategy or indeed individual contract and framework level strategies for every contract, every framework that organisations are putting in place. But in terms of practice, improving practice, the evidence that we're looking for comes largely, a lot of the time, through contract management. So it's in the contract management arena that we're looking for the evidence. Local communities will be looking for evidence. Other people, ministers, will be looking for the evidence. So are we delivering what we said we were going to deliver? That comes through contract management, and all of that gets fed into the annual reporting process. So the reason I'm focusing on this is that that fits together as a sequence of events, and it helps to promote the examples, the good practice, the improving practice that we're here to talk about today. So the next slide, please, gives me a chance to focus on local priorities, or to flag the fact that organisations, public bodies, will be increasingly requiring to focus on local priorities. So, of course, the inclusion of community benefits when awarding contracts can help to support local priority groups, and knowing what those local priorities are is increasingly important. The benefits that can be delivered then through subcontracting to local suppliers or training and apprenticeship opportunities we're all familiar with, and I'll be talking about a couple of examples. But really, this slide is to remind me to mention the two things that are really themes as well for me today. People joke that these are my two middle names, relevance and proportionality. It's relevance to your local community and what they value, and proportionality in terms of what are you delivering in each individual contract and framework. It'll be different benefits and different outcomes for the different sizes and scales of contracts and frameworks. So the next one, please. Here we're talking about community benefits and in procurement, through procurement, and the different things that organisations can achieve. I know last week I've listened with interest to what was covered last week, employment, skills and training opportunities, CITB from Laura and so on. But also, still on the theme of relevance and proportionality, I wanted to flag the fact that it will be different for different organisations, And in that respect, I was drawing attention to Vanessa's presentation from Perth and Kinross and their wish list, the idea of generating the wish list. The community generates that wish list. It's the community on whose behalf procurement is being done. So I wanted to emphasize that we're doing things in response to what the community will value. And I think that's going to come even more starkly into focus as we are responding to the economic challenges facing us at the moment. So the next one, for the sake of time, I will get on to my 2 case studies, and they're at different scales. So I wanted to talk about a couple of examples here. The first one being from the Wheatley Group. Many of you will be very familiar with the work that Wheatley have done over the years, and of course community benefits. Joe will testify to the fact that community benefits work has been going on for many years in Scotland. But Wheatley is one of those organisations who's spent some time identifying priority groups, and that's why I wanted to use this one as a case study, helping to open up training and employment opportunities for their priority groups, whether that's lone parents or people accessing benefits, people who are experiencing homelessness. The point here is that you need to focus on those priority groups that are important for you. So the next slide goes into a little more detail on that in terms of delivering the numbers. And that's why I was at pains to say that looking at annual procurement reports and looking at the evidence base for what we're delivering in Scotland, here's an example of improving practice where over the years, Wheatley and others have been demonstrating what they've done through procurement. Here's another set of good numbers. And I wanted to focus on a couple of things in particular. The scale of the delivery in terms of 192 jobs and placements and apprenticeships, yes, that's important. And 31% of these going to priority groups. But in particular, I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that 17% of those went to people living in Wheatley homes. The fact that the people living in those Wheatley homes are the beneficiaries of some of this activity through procurement is a really powerful message, I think. And of course, it's done through Wheatley work, so it's done at scale, encouraging suppliers to consider offering more training and job opportunities to priority groups. That's at one scale, but if we turn to the last example, on the next slide, this is a different scale. Oh, sorry. This is at a different scale. It's a City of Glasgow College example. And again, many of you will be familiar with how benefits have been delivered here, but I was delivering some training on social issues in procurement last week, and Charlie Kennedy, the supply chain manager from City of Glasgow College, we got into a conversation about the story behind the story behind the case study of City of Glasgow College. And this is an example of asking for what you want and making sure that it's delivered. In this case, the painting contract, the contractors were required to develop a programme to work closely with educational establishments to maximise educational opportunities that arise through the performance of the contract. And how that played out in practice, as you can see on the screen, 2 students gaining a 4-year apprenticeship with a painting and decorating company. Started off with volunteering and led to apprenticeships. And even more important than that would be it led to qualifications. So in this case, we're getting educational qualifications coming out of a painting contract, and the tendering process asking for what the organisation wanted that was relevant to their own priority groups. The story behind that is that Charlie and I were discussing the benefits, and to one of those students in particular, who wasn't young at the start of this process, he wasn't a teenager when he started out on this process, has 3 young boys. And the idea behind the case study for me is that it's promoting the fact that the company car that Jamie was able to get access to through this apprenticeship has changed his life, has changed his family's life. And it's although I'm an environmental sustainable procurement person, so I would say I'd rather it was an electric or a hybrid car at the very least, but nevertheless, the company car has changed his life. And it shows what can be done, the spin-offs that can come from asking for community benefits through the procurement process. And my last line is to say that, quoting Charlie Kennedy himself, the supply chain manager, it's an excellent example of partnership engagement between the college and industry by procurement for community benefit. So thanks very much for your attention, and I hope I haven't run over, Liz.
Sorry about that, I was unmuted. Can everyone hear me now? Sorry, I started to speak there, not realizing I was on mute. Apologies. No, Barbara, you're very much to time. We're just slightly over now. So thank you very much. That was great. That was a great scene setter, and also really good to give the bigger picture combined with some really tangible, practical examples. Okay, just moving on swiftly now. I'd like to now introduce our second speaker for the morning. This is Jane Thompson, who is Assistant Head of Glasgow City Region Deal. Jane has worked in local government for over 15 years in corporate policy, corporate governance, and in delivering and evaluating the city's legacy strategy for the Commonwealth 2014 Games. She's held her current post for just over a year and leads a team that governs the Glasgow City Region 1.13 billion Infrastructure Programme Fund and delivering the Glasgow City Region Economic Strategy Action Plan. So big territory we're talking here. So Jane will look at how to engage a more diverse range of business and how to deliver better procurement to achieve more. Over to you, Jane.
Thanks very much, Liz, for that introduction. Can you hear me all right, hopefully? Yep, good. So I'd like to thank firstly EDAS for inviting me to come along today and provide you with an overview of the work that we're undertaking across the city region and the City Deal programme in particular to translate sustainable procurement policy into practice. So a bit about the nuts and bolts of how we actually do that. I'd also just like to thank Edwina for giving me a catchy title for my presentation. Knowing what you want and not being afraid to ask for it makes us sound very assertive and dynamic, which we are. And also just to get a disclaimer out before I really get into my presentation, I'm not, I don't have a sustainable procurement background, but I'm joined on today's call by some of my colleagues who are procurement experts, and Dorothy Balfour from North Lanarkshire Council is the chair of our procurement support group, and my colleague Anita Jane Smith has worked very hard on all the community benefits, so I'm sure they'll be able to help us later on with any questions. But first of all, I thought I'd start by giving you a quick overview of the city region and the city deal itself, just to set the scene and the context for you. So the city region, it covers the 8 local authorities in the west of Scotland. As you probably know, it has many economic strengths, but it has a lot of issues from its industrial past, and it continues to have high levels of vacant and derelict land, deprivation and economic inactivity due to ill health. And a lot of people that we would probably categorise in your own areas, you would have in priority groups as such, and I know that Barbara just spoke about that there, and I'll come to that later on in my presentation about our priority groups. But given the challenges we faced back in 2014, the 8 local authorities came together and we secured a 1.13 billion infrastructure economic growth deal with the UK and Scottish governments. And those funds are supporting 21 diverse projects that are being delivered across the region. Now actually since this map has been created, we've actually got a new project in East Dunbartonshire, so there should be a little dot there to show you about that. Next slide, thanks Alison. In terms of the projects themselves, it's a wide variety. They're going to see the creation of business, commercial and retail space, schools, visitor centres, there's a cruise ship terminal at Inverclyde, at Greenock. We're going to have new roads, bridges across the Clyde and the M8, public realm, active travel routes, public transport infrastructure, including of course the link from Glasgow Airport to Paisley-Gilmer Street. There's also a wide range of enabling works, lots of civil engineering and things. So we've got land remediation, drainage and flood alleviation works, really that's targeted on freeing up land for future economic use for the creation of housing, retail and commercial spaces, and green space as well, I should add. So just in terms of what the city deal is aiming to achieve, next slide, thanks Alison. You'll see there some of the outcomes that we're seeking once all of these assets are operational. Sorry, back to the last slide. Thanks, Alison, thanks. Once all these assets are operational, we should have 29,000 permanent jobs, creation of 29,000 permanent jobs across the region, and an associated uplift of the region's GVA of 2.2 billion per year. But crucially, in the development of these assets, we're expecting to have 15,000 construction jobs created during that build phase. And of course, for us, we want to maximise the benefits that are accrued across the region in terms of businesses winning contracts and local employment in the delivery of all that capital investment. So, given the opportunity, back in 2015, just immediately after the deal had started, Thanks, Alison. It is the next slide now. What we did is, just in terms of the nuts and bolts, we actually established a group of procurement and legal experts from across the region's 8 local authorities, and that's a procurement support group. And that group then moved on to oversee the creation of our own programme and community benefit strategy for the region, for City Deal. Now, as you know, Barbara's demonstrated and others last week, I know that you all have your own community benefit activity that you'll be delivering in local authorities and your own organisations, and that very much was the case across our 8 member authorities. For us, the challenge was to bring it all together for the 8 authorities and having a kind of umbrella over the existing community benefit strategies and approaches. So we did that through the development of that strategy. And with that completed, the group then facilitated the translation of the policy and the strategy into practice through the development of a number of tools. We developed the City Deal programme contract pipeline, with this being used to raise awareness among the contract opportunities through supplier development programme events, for instance, and you're really important to get that information out there about the opportunities that are becoming available. The group also oversaw the development of our Sustainable Procurement Buyers Guide, and that's used by City Deal project managers, local procurement officers, and amongst other things, the guide outlines the community benefit contract requirements. So what are we actually looking for from suppliers? It includes standardised clauses for inclusion in contracts, provides guidance on the evaluation of community benefits and tenders, and it sets out the process and requirements of our monitoring reporting using our online tool Senefits, which I'll talk about later. In addition to that, we've got a related suppliers guide was also developed, and it's issued, providing a common consistent experience for suppliers who are bidding for City Deal projects across the city region. So as I say, it was about having that umbrella approach sitting above all of the local authorities' individual procurement approaches that was going to standardise what we look for City Deal. And in addition to that, the group also helps to appraise our City Deal business cases, so kind of project applications as they come through, to ensure that project managers have the necessary plans in place to comply with all of the guidance. Next slide, Alison, thanks. So with our strategy and various documents having been established early on to encourage the delivery of community benefits, in 2017-18, we realised we needed more resource. It is quite resource intensive to get all this information out there, to establish the benefits, work with suppliers, and then undertake the monitoring and evaluation. So a number of our local authorities actually recruited dedicated community benefit officers, and they came together to form a region-wide group. But locally within their own authorities, those officers really had to work to work with project managers to evaluate community benefits that were being offered within tenders. They assist suppliers to deliver their community benefits. So if a supplier is offering a work experience opportunity, then community benefit officers will make sure there's the links there into education services, for example, who will identify appropriate clients or young people who can take part in that opportunity. And they'll also undertake any necessary health and safety visits to sites, etc. So, they're really key in establishing those local links within the services. And they also provide for us, crucially, the monitoring information about what's being secured and what's being delivered as well, and that helps us give a programme-wide picture. In addition to all of the work they do locally, they've also come together to form a group, which was then about expanding and refining the list of community benefit activities that we should seek from suppliers. Identifying priority groups we would like to see being the beneficiaries of these activities. And they developed a menu of benefits with scores attached to them for different outcomes, with additional points where suppliers were engaging with our targeted priority groups. And they've also worked with other local authorities, especially Edinburgh City Council and a private sector company, Wildcat Applications, to develop and roll out a bespoke software system, which is used by our team in the Programme Management Office, individual project managers and contractors to report, monitor, manage and evidence community benefit delivery. So as you can imagine, with this work going on across the 8 member authorities, that was quite a task in bringing all that together. So we had a standardised reporting tool Next slide, thanks Alison. So just moving on, in terms of, so what do we want? Because we know what we want and we're not afraid to ask. Well, we want community benefit outcomes, and I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar, and these will be the types of outcomes that you're looking for yourself. So around recruitment, employment, skills and training opportunities, vocational and specialist qualifications, community engagement, non-financial and financial support, and supply chain development opportunities. So ensuring that the supply chain's opened up and advertised to SMEs for any opportunities that are there. And we want to target these at priority groups. And the next slide, Alison, that just shows you the priority groups that we've identified. So there's 25 groups that we're asking suppliers to support under their community benefit commitments. This list was developed based on recognised inclusive growth priorities across the region, and also with reference to the Tackling Child Poverty Action Plan, which our Cabinet signed up to say we'd support the aims and objectives of that action plan through delivery of City Deal. So these groups have been identified from that. And the menu of benefit outcomes that we give to suppliers outlines priority groups, benefit points, etc. that are associated with offering community benefit to these priority groups. So very quickly, the next slide just gives you an overview of some of the key achievements that we've to date to the end of September. So far, £108 million worth of Tier 1 contracts that have been awarded to region-based businesses. And crucially, 34 million of that has been to SMEs, and that's just Tier 1. So obviously those, there will be other contracts that are awarded out with the region that hopefully subcontractors will be actually accessing as well. And we're looking to gain more information on that, and we've built that into our benefits reporting, so we should have more information on that in the future. We've also achieved £90,000 of financial support for community groups and projects, and 1,095 community benefit opportunities have been secured, over half of which have now been delivered. So you can see there 135 employment in the employment category, and 337 skills and training, and 40 supply chain development category, and that would be support from Tier 1s to SMEs, for instance. So just finishing off, the next slide, thanks Alison. So the next step for us, as I said, we're continuing, it's a focus on continuing to maximise benefits from the City Deal's remaining expenditure. So I think we've got about another 800 million left to spend over the coming year, so lots of contract opportunities there. We've now got all of our monitoring, reporting, our officers in place to help us really, to drive forward on our achievements. So we're obviously looking to increase contracts awarded to region-based businesses, increase the proportion targeted at priority groups. Also very interested now in moving into matching, much better matching of community needs with supplier offer. And I was really interested in, managed to watch on YouTube last week's session where Perth and Kinross gave the overview of their community wish list. So I think we'll be pinching some ideas from there and getting in contact with them. That's some super things to learn from that. In addition to that, we're also now looking to take that practice from the region-wide working on the City Deal programme into kind of business as usual across the member authorities. And earlier this year, the leaders of the 8 local authorities agreed that we should now seek to extend that practice out through the development of a Glasgow City Region Sustainable Procurement Strategy, and that would therefore apply to other capital activity underway across the region. And not only that, we're also looking hopefully to engage with our region partners in terms of a regional economic partnership and other key anchor institutions, again, to see if we can begin to standardise some of our practices for suppliers, so it's easier for them to engage with us. And we're fortunate to be working with colleagues from Scottish Government and the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, CLES, who I think have a session on today as well. They're going to help us to link into other anchor institutions to see how we can do more on sustainable procurement together. So that was a very quick overview. Alison, the next slide is basically just to direct you. You can get more information at our City Region website. There's case studies there on community benefits that we've delivered to date, and we're hopefully going to be putting much more information up over the coming weeks for getting our website revamped. And also our annual performance report for this year just has some case studies within it. So I'm happy to, I think we're back to you, Liz, and we can have questions later on.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thanks for the whistle-stop tour of what's obviously a really significant investment in infrastructure across the region, but I think very clear messages in there about what can not just be built on, but also apply to other investments as they come on stream. We're going to shift now from the kind of regional city approach to looking at health and procurement. And I'd like to introduce Stevie McLaughlin, who's Head of Procurement with NHS National Services Scotland. Stevie joined NHS Scotland in 2009 from a supply chain and procurement background within the private sector. He's currently the Head of Corporate Procurement within NHS National Services Scotland, with responsibility for around 70 million of NHS Scotland spend. Stevie believes passionately that great procurement and management from a strong supply base can deliver huge value for the NHS, not in terms of just of cost savings, but also in delivering innovation, social value and environmental benefits, which is of course what today's event is all about. Stevie is going to focus on health and community benefits in procurement and health. So over to you, Stevie.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Start my video. It's the first time I've used Zoom, so bear with me. I share my screen. Yeah, share my screen. Okay, so right, let's try and get this. Okay, yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, obviously Head of Procurement at National Services Scotland, but I'm also part of the senior management team of NHS National Procurement Health Centre of Expertise. This kind of, just to sort of set the scene, National Procurement being the centre of expertise and the kind of overarching procurement organisation we have about 1.5 billion spend on our contract register. That's what we contract for each year. The difficulty of being that kind of overarching organisation means that we're one step back from the front line, which means we don't have that local level of knowledge and intelligence. So what we kind of do is when we put the national frameworks in place, we'll talk about the need for community benefits, and then our supply chain will respond and say, that's great, we're ready to go on this. What kind of community benefits do you want us to deliver against? And we then scratch our head and say, don't really know. So the kind of genesis of this idea came from that, and then from a short life working group that I'm on for, believe it or not, serious and organised crime. And at the end of last year, one of the colleagues on the group was from an organisation called Action for Children. And he spoke very passionately about the lurking danger that children in Scotland faced with risk for serious and organised crime if they were and typically it's from deprived areas. So that kind of really sparked a real interest for me, and I got struck up a relationship with the person, and we started engaging with Action for Children. I just kind of wanted to set the scene, to say, what does this really mean? And that's what it really means to me, and hopefully some procurement colleagues. I just want to show this short film. So I suppose that says it more eloquently than I ever could. But onto the conflicting demands that we have in NHS procurement. Oops. Sorry, can't get into that. So sorry about that, technical problems. Yeah, this slide attempts to show the conflicting demands that we face. You know, so we've got the purpose there that, you know, the previous slide and the video showed. That's kind of what we're here for. Procurement, we should remember the purpose we're here for is to support health and to support the social cohesion of our country. But the corporation demands get in the way. All of the numerous demands that are on us. You know, we've got to save money, we've got to be compliant, we've got to follow the regulatory rules. And I think that's over the balance is probably weighted too much on that side just now. So we have to sort of get out of the day-to-day job of the corporation that's demanding our attention. And that's kind of what this program or this is what we're trying to sort of tackle. So the concept really is about lifting our head up to free us from that day-to-day, you know, as actually seeing the wood from the trees, and not just to give us that space to actually. Sorry, somebody just. Sorry, my phone went there. Really trying to get away from the day-to-day and get us onto the purpose and to help our communities. That's where the approach to the community marketplace is an attempt to bridge that gap. So that, as I say there, the issue we have at our level nationally is the identification. So we need to, you know, set up a means of identifying the community needs, and through engagement with third sector and community organisations, and then to facilitate that collaboration between NHS Scotland suppliers and the third sector, and then lead that right through to support and delivery of the community benefits right across NHS Scotland. Because as I touched on earlier, NHS National Procurement manage 1.5 billion of spend, but NHS procurement across all of the health boards, we can influence up to 2.5 billion spend each year. That's real leverage. So the solution itself is an online web portal. This is a technical bit. So basically what we're looking for is the third sector and the community organisations to register on the portal. They would upload their need, and we'll have, you know, specific fields in there for them to complete for us. The suppliers would also register and review the actual list of needs that are on there. They would then bid against a particular need that they felt was something they wanted to support as close to their heart. And then that engagement would happen. So the system will automatically connect the third sector or their community organisation with our supplier. They'll then do that sort of engagement offline. They'll work together and agree the delivery, and then the delivery will be noted into the system itself. And then where we get involved is through our supplier management program, and we'll work with the suppliers to look at the evidence that delivery has been made, and ensure that the actual the delivery is a real community benefit. The yeah, I'm just trying to look at my notes here, sorry. So on the side there, we've got the partners who are involved in this. So this isn't just national procurement on its own. We've got, as I say, Action for Children involved in giving us their insights. We've got Health in Minds, a mental health charity, who's supporting us in the development of this as well. And we've got 3 health board partners, sorry, 4 if we count Public Health Scotland. So we've got some of the biggest health boards there as well, and they're fully behind it, fully committed to try and make this work, so they can utilise it on a local basis as well. And we've got the support of Public Health Scotland, because what we're trying to do is tie this into the health priorities at a national level, and then in future try and ensure that the local priorities are built into that requirement as well. And we've got, sorry, the WH Malcolm, so that we're dealing with, they're a huge Scottish supplier who've been working with us for a while now, and we're giving them the opportunity to feed in from the private sector business perspective about, you know, to let them know, let their voice be heard on that. I think just this last one sort of, you know, the Titanic, that, you know, that was such a sprawling bureaucracy, and these little course corrections and fixing things, try to put things in place to get us to where we need to be. They may not be evident at first, but as we maintain these courses and we progress it and keep pushing, pretty soon you'll start to see that, you know, the Titanic will turn, and we'll start to deliver an evidence that these benefits are having a real impact. There's a link at the bottom there. It's The Power of Procurement. It's an NHS Scotland procurement film. I'll not show that today, but that's there for you to review and see what we're doing in the NHS procurement sphere. And then that was it for me.
Okay, Stevie, thank you so much. I think it's always interesting, isn't it, when sometimes it just takes working with a particular partner or meeting a particular organisation to really spark your passion, I suppose, and an emotive response that then takes you in a certain direction. Seems like Action for Children certainly did that for you. I must say, as somebody who's worked most of our working life in the third sector, I'm delighted to hear about that connection. I suppose what I wonder is if there's perhaps scope to work with an organisation such as Voluntary Health Scotland, which you know, is actually an umbrella body which would link you to a huge array of different types of organisations working in the health sphere. So that's maybe one to consider. I would have put that in the chat, but I'm trying to keep an eye on time and all the rest of it. So now I'm conscious that we're starting to get some conversations taking place in the chat. That's great. Please continue to do that. And our speakers, I think, will pick up on some of the content there. But we've just got one final speaker for this morning before we go into the roundtable session. So, and our speaker is Laurie Wilcox. He's from the Scottish Government. He's a senior e-commerce and management information specialist in the Procurement Directorate within the Scottish Government. Now, he's worked for the Scottish Government in e-commerce for 16 years in various roles and has extensive knowledge of e-commerce shared services solutions. He's currently working on delivering improved data analytics and management information reporting to the Scottish public sector. And he's here this morning to speak about making better use of data. So finally, Laurie, over to you. Now, we're hoping that we won't have any technical glitches here, because I know we're having a few issues with internet earlier on. So fingers crossed it'll all keep going. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Liz. I hope you can hear me now. I've actually plugged my phone in rather than my laptop, so we'll see how it goes. So yeah, my name is Laurie Wilcox, and I noticed my slide was entitled Making Better Use of Data. What opportunities does digital bring, and do we have the skills to utilise technology to drive efficiency and productivity through procurement processes? Wow, well, that certainly sets a challenge, and certainly not one I could cover in 10 minutes. But to address this, I'd like to give you an overview of Grow Local. And apologies to those of you who are attending who've seen this before. You must now start to realise that I am actually a one-trick pony. Grow Local is a piece of additional functionality of the Scottish Procurement Information Hub, as has been provided as part of the restart and recovery work that's ongoing. The functionality has been around for a number of years. However, it's in the current economic climate, it's now probably more relevant than ever. So what I'll try and do in this session is give you an overview of the key points and principles, and I'll run through a couple of sample screens of the product, and I'll share how I think Grow Local can help be beneficial overall. So, but Grow Local, as I say, it's part of the hub, the Scottish Procurement Information Hub, which is a spend spend analytics tool that over 100 public sector organisations provide data to. That includes all local authorities. Grow Local is primarily designed to be used by local authorities or contracting authorities who are serving a local area. The functionality includes a local supplier directory that helps target specific spend categories and offers a list of suppliers who might potentially provide products and services. It also identifies opportunities for upskilling suppliers and identifying where development opportunities may exist. So Grow Local data can help identify active categories where the high proportion of spend is with suppliers outside of a defined local area. And it identifies the potential of moving a greater proportion of that spend to locally based suppliers. Local procurement and economic development knowledge needs to be applied to make the opportunities actually exist. Next slide, please, Alison. So we're now looking into the core of Grow Local and how each individual instance is configured. The first and most vital step is to check how regions are defined and exactly what local means. Next, please. This slide describes what is meant by the 3 geographic areas that are reported on. The way each region is described starts from local and works outwards. Local is a local authority area. Next, we have the government region. This is usually neighbouring local authorities, but can be defined by each authority as they see fit. They can change it. Sub-region is where, in the Scottish version of Grow Local, is any Scottish region not covered by local and government region definitions. Next, please. So now we've defined that, we now have to look at sort of how we can actually access some data. And we do that by running something called an opportunity analysis report. This uses 2 different taxonomies to define suppliers. One is Thompson, the other one is V code or vendor code. It's very similar to ProClass, but additional work was carried out by DXC to make it more public sector applicable and more relevant. And it's entirely up to the user as to which taxonomy they prefer. And to be honest, there's not a great deal of difference between them. So opportunity analysis is a key report that can be extracted from Grow Local. Next, please. This is an example of a report that is produced as part of the opportunity analysis. The traffic light system indicates areas worth further investigation. Next, please, Alison. So the traffic light system is calculated by DXC and uses a criteria in the slide. Green means a category is one that should be looked into further and potentially offers opportunities to increase local spend. Amber indicates opportunities may be limited. And the red definition means that you either have 80% of your spend with local suppliers already, or there are no local suppliers to meet the requirement. Next, please, Alison. This is a more detailed example of what's produced from the opportunity analysis report. The percentage spend across the local categories I described is recorded by the traffic light colours in the 3 columns in the middle. In very simple terms, if the percentage spend outside of the government region is large, it means your supply base is outside of your local and government regions. This means, logically then, your spend is either in the wider Scottish area or outside of Scotland. What this report here shows is categories have been identified for further investigation due to the lots of the green on the slide. You'll notice you can potentially eliminate certain categories because there are national contracts in place, or the likelihood of a local supplier being in a position to deliver the contract is unlikely. For example, I've highlighted here mains electricity suppliers and fixed telecom service providers, not something that you'd imagine a small local supplier to provide for you. In this example, the report's sorted from highest ranked category to lowest, and as in Excel, you can just click on any of the columns and resort the report. You can also export the whole report to Excel and then manipulate it yourself from there. To benefit from the use of Grow Local, next slide, sorry, Alison. To benefit from the use of Grow Local, a number of steps need to be taken. So this is how to develop a strategy. Now, the first piece of advice would be to identify the existing suppliers. And you want to see who is already providing that service that you're spending on. By clicking on a link under the number of vendors, the tool allows you to drill down to identify current suppliers. In a Grow Local report, anything that is underlined gives you a drill down capacity. It's important to note that local suppliers that are currently being used are not going to be in the vendor directory. That only holds local suppliers that are not being used by the authority. Next slide, please. So then the next step, once you've identified who you're using, is to look at who in the directory you could potentially use. So again, you just click on the button there, and it would list all the suppliers in that category that are not being used. Next, please, Alison. So this is how the directory tab is laid out. You'll notice there it's a supplier name, a phone number, a physical address, but there's not an email address. This is one of the weaknesses, I'd say, of Grow Local. But my advice would be to cross-reference the supplier that you've identified with Public Contract Scotland, and to get an email address and confirm that the other details are the same. Just to reiterate, the directory has suppliers from the local area as defined by ONS that you are not currently using. Next, please, Alice. Another option you have is to sort the categories to identify where the current suppliers are all in your locality, or alternatively, where there are suppliers who can provide a service, where there are no suppliers, who can provide a service. This means that economic development teams could look to encourage suppliers to move to the area, or maybe look at local suppliers and ask them to diversify their current offerings. To help you identify the key thing here is a column on the far right, vendors in directory. If that number is 0, then there are no local suppliers for that particular category. And that might be an opportunity to look into. And finally, the last slide, please, Alison. Yeah, so in conclusion, just a few thoughts here. So Grow Local is a powerful tool, and it does allow you to identify local suppliers you're not using and maybe invite them to take part by maybe a Meet the Buyer event or something similar. It's not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve all issues, because one of the things it takes is some resource to actually run the reports and analyze them. And also, you do require local knowledge and understanding of your supplier base. Without that, you wouldn't understand which suppliers you could and couldn't use. So it's simple to use. I can use it. And the export functionality is a real benefit. You can export any of the reports, and you can export the directory. You can then use those to manipulate them offline. So if it's used in conjunction with PCS and local knowledge and maybe other local databases, it could really bring some strengths to both the procurement department and economic development areas to actually develop new strategies going forward. That's me. I'll just gallop through that very, very quickly. If anyone has got any questions, my email address is there, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Laurie. That's really interesting tool there. Again, if we're going to move into the workshops just now, so otherwise I'm sure lots of people would have some questions. I've certainly got some questions about how how people use that tool, how they make the best use of it, and that key point about how do people actually make sure they're on the list, So anyway, won't get into all of that just now. Please use the chat room if you get anything you want to ask. We're now going to move into the roundtable working groups. We're running a little bit over, I think 10 or 11 minutes over, but we're okay, we're fine for time. But I am going to cut the time we've got a little bit further for the working group discussion. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague Alison Jones to take us through how this is being organised. I'd suggest we take 15 minutes for the roundtable discussion, so we have time for the feedback from the facilitators and ideally maybe a few questions at the end before we finish up. So, okay, everyone. I hope that was a useful experience being in your different groups. Realise it was a little bit shorter than we'd intended, but hopefully you still managed to get a good run at the questions that we'd set. Okay, so we had 3 breakout groups and they were facilitated by Edwina, Lorraine and Joe. So if we maybe just take them in that order. Edwina, could I ask you to give some feedback from your group first?
Absolutely. Okay. That unmute has worked. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So first of all, I suppose we had a really interesting discussion. I don't think we went through the questions in quite the way that I think really what we were talking about is what's being delivered and a lot of the challenges around counting what's being delivered. So while a lot of community benefits are being delivered and subcontracting opportunities and jobs and training opportunities are being delivered, there are challenges around counting that. I think really came back quite heavily in our group, particularly at the moment, and particularly with more strain on people. We've got a lot more added to our daily jobs, for example, and while a lot of people are doing a lot of good work, that there are challenges in really making sure that that's counted. In relation to what could be delivered, we actually had some interesting discussions around third sector as suppliers, and also around grow local and using that as a tool, but also not just local but social as well. That was the main output from our discussion. Oh, I think you're on mute, Liz, unless that's just me.
No, you're right, it's me.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, Lorraine, could we take your feedback now? Thank you, and thanks, Edwina.
Hi there. We started off by talking about grow local, and Laurie was telling us that a number of city region deals are using it, and another few are interested in using it too. And we said that think about your neighbouring areas, not just your own local area. Most of our discussion talked about challenges as well, and it was clear from the feedback that there's a lot of this dedicated resource, and it is resource intensive, so that's important to have that in place. Once your strategies are developed, you need to dedicate resource to developing your toolkits. You also need resource to roll it out and to monitor and record the benefits that are being achieved. Although we did say it is achievable, but you need to dedicate the resource to it. We also said a couple of lessons learned was to try and keep it simple and create a standard approach. And a really good thing that came out was that we all seem to be delivering, there's a lot of good things happening across the public sector. We're delivering similar types of benefits and trying to do things in a similar way. And there was a suggestion of a regular group to exchange ideas and examples. And I think hopefully I've covered most of what we talked about.
Okay. Thanks very much, Lorraine. Yeah, I think I joined at the end of the group, so I think certainly in terms of your summary, that reflects what I was hearing. Okay, and finally over to Joe, if you want to give your feedback now.
Yes, thanks, Liz. So really interesting group, and really focus on suppliers and supplier development, actually. So I think it kind of started off about learning from some of the activity that's happening at a subcontracting level. But the primary, Dave kicked off the chat about conversion factors. So from probably mainly small third sector businesses bidding for contracts versus the number that actually win, and how can we capture that and make sure we're improving it, or getting the best odds. So I think there's a thing about learning from subcontracting, Glasgow City Region have, as part of their contract management on city deals, that they're recording Tier 2 contract awards, and whether that's advertised through PCS or not, they're holding Tier 1 contractors' feet to the fire on how they're doing on local engagement. Gillian from the Supplier Development Programme said that they're actively working with a number of Tier 1 suppliers around the country to help them improve their performance, so giving them or helping them to identify how to access the local supply bases and make sure those opportunities are clear and available. And also, one of the things that Anita mentioned was that one of the offerings under community benefits is actually some supplier development by the larger companies. Across the board, there is something about, and Supplier Development Programme are trying to align the training they provide better with the opportunities that are coming available. So again, this is all about increasing conversion rates of small local suppliers probably, or Scottish suppliers bidding and then converting to winning. So a little bit more of a focus on meeting the need. And interestingly, Jill was saying that last week at the procurement conference, and I haven't managed to watch this yet, that they had done a session on the supplier's view of a tender. So that's some work for procurers, I would suggest, to understand how this feels if you're on the receiving side of the ITT, and obviously there's some takeaways for buyers in that respect as to how they might change the behaviours, how they might change the wording and things that we could do better to make contracts more accessible. And the other point, and this was Chris, was something about, and I know there's a lot of work that we're doing on data at the moment. I know there was a pin put out on this. To actually look at all the data and all the information we have, and is there something around developing Public Contract Scotland, something about having more of a supplier platform so suppliers can speak to each other, and realising there's will always be a degree of competition, but actually if they might identify mutual opportunities. And that was most of what was talked about in that group. I think I just want to mention, sorry, that and Gillian brought this up, that at the moment we have a supplier survey, so I think we'll possibly provide a link to that. So if people have views from the market side that we're, in order to develop our policy in respect to this and practice, we're running a supplier survey at the moment. That's me, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jo. Thanks everyone for your feedback there. It's interesting that the subject of third sector does keep coming up in each of the workshops. I think it was mentioned, and I obviously responded to what Stevie was saying earlier. There are, network and umbrella organisations out there that act as that kind of link, if you like, into that wider third sector. And I'm just wondering if we're making the most of that. Each local authority area has a third sector interface. Most third sector interfaces, all should, I think most do, keep databases of third sector organisations in their area, so they can act as a conduit to perhaps connecting contractors, commissioners with potential suppliers in that local sector. I also mentioned Voluntary Health Scotland, who again are a membership body who have a large base of health-based voluntary sector organisations, likewise SCVO for as a national body for local organisations across the country. So there are a variety of different routes, and I'm just wondering if we're kind of missing a trick on some of this and bringing that to the table. I know when I worked in Glasgow for the interface there, we certainly had a number of meetings, a number of sessions with, for example, health and social care partnerships around how to better work and co-produce their services with local organisations, and it created exactly that space that you were describing, Jo, for that dialogue about what might be the barriers that would prevent organisations from going for tenders or from submitting even as a consortium. So I think just having that space for dialogue is really important going forward if we're really going to make the most of the opportunities that clearly all of this investment is bringing. And to be fair to those who are commissioning or who are procuring and tendering, if you don't know that people are there, then you're not, you don't know the market fully, then you can't be blamed for not, for not perhaps awarding contracts. It's got to be a two-way dialogue. So I think all of that's really interesting. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat box. I did note down some questions that were coming up. I think actually most of them in the chat box have been answered. So there was one I did want to bring up about embedding fair and ethical trade in procurement, which I think, Barbara, you might have answered already on the chat box, but I don't know if you want to say something about that, because that certainly seemed to be an issue. But is that being included in tender opportunities? So Barbara, are you still with us? I'm not sure. I can't see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm still here, Liz.
Yeah.
I'm probably not best placed. I did put an answer in the chat box actually to that one. I was drawing attention to the opportunities to address those issues in supplier selection and qualification stages and in contract management. So the question was directed at the specification and award, but
Yeah.
I was drawing attention to the fact that things can be done in supplier qualification and in contract management. So perhaps making sure that you address the right issues at the right stage of the procurement tendering process. But there are specialists on this call who would be much better placed to answer it than I am.
Okay. Does anyone else want to come in on that? Or Joe, do you have something you want to add?
It's actually Lorraine, to be honest. So
right. Okay.
Sorry to put her on the spot.
Do you want to respond to that, Lorraine? Are you able to respond to that?
I was just going to say, during our chat, the sustainable procurement duty tools were mentioned, and as part of that, we encourage buyers to consider fair and ethically traded, along with all the other social and environmental considerations. And there is supporting guidance under there that explains at each stage of the procurement process what you can do around those issues. So we can provide a link to that as well. I'm not sure I'm sophisticated enough technology wise to do it here, but maybe I could provide that later.
Yeah, we can certainly follow up with you in terms of anything that can be shared across this community. So happy to do that, Lorraine. Thank you. But one more question just before we finish, because we've just literally got a minute before I say our thanks. There was another question that came up about, can main contractors use Grow Local to identify subcontracting opportunities that also bring community benefits? I think that one would be for Laurie, obviously. Laurie, if you're still with us, are you able to respond to that?
Yes, I'm still with you, Liz.
Yeah.
I've not actually looked into seeing what we could do regarding subcontractors. Actually, there's certainly opportunities in PCS to identify opportunities, and I certainly agree with the idea of putting a platform of some sort to let suppliers share knowledge on that, because that would be useful when the main supplier wins a contract to let others know there'll be subcontract opportunities. But I'll look into Grow Local a bit more and see if there's anything I can find out on that to answer that question better.
Okay, great, thank you. So again, we can pick up on that kind of post this session. There were some other questions in the chat, if anyone picked up on that. I think mainly around, taking baselines, for example, before community benefit elements were added in, and is there a way to measure impact around that? So again, if there's any, I think some of that was answered in the chat, so if there's any more information that's worth sharing for our participants on that, then we'd really welcome that. Okay, I am very conscious of time. We are just finishing now. So I really do want to thank sincerely all of our speakers this morning, Barbara, Jane, Stevie and Laurie, who have all taken time out of their busy schedules to present. And of course, thanks to our EDAS colleagues, Elaine and Alison, for doing all of the background arrangements and technology and keeping us all connected, and who supported us throughout this event. And last, of course, and not least for all of you, because without you attending and participating, we wouldn't have an event. So I really hope that you've benefited and you've enjoyed this morning's session. Post this event, we are sharing, I believe, a recording of the event on our website, along with what's called a wakelet, which is new to me, but apparently it's a kind of a storybook almost of what's happened this morning with various links, which is where I think we'll add in the additional details that people have been asking for there. So it includes slides and key links and thoughts and information from the chat box, so you don't miss anything. And beyond that point, I really just want to say, look out for further events. We will have a look, I think, and have a chat about the potential to have some kind of network around this if there's an appetite for that. But I don't think this is going to be the end of the discussion or the end of the conversation clearly on this issue. We know that developments such as community wealth building, are clearly being looked at and being rolled out. So this is all has a big contribution to make to that agenda. So so really, I think watch this space. And again, we really appreciate it if you could look at the EDAS website for other events that are coming up, because we'd love to have you along. It's only through conversation and dialogue and sharing that we build knowledge and connectivity, particularly in these challenging times. As I say, I'm looking forward to the day when we can all be in the same space, in the same room, and it may be a bit easier. But for now, I hope that you've managed to get what you needed from this event and you've enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time and hope to see you at another event very soon. Thank you.